everybody. How are you doing? If you've come for the Google Plus and the +1 button talk, you're in the right place. Who here is on the Google Plus project? Aww, my people. It's cool, right? There's a few things that I find are really special, like uniquely special, and are interesting. The first one is circles. And again, on a personal note, I found myself, before we released the Google Plus project, not sharing very much. Because I only had two options. One, I'd share with the entire world, or I wouldn't share at all. Right? I could only do one or the other. I couldn't share with just my friends or with just my family. Right? It had to be everyone who I deemed as a friend. But that's not really how it works, right? Like, I have my friends and my family and my classmates and awesome people that I meet in Argentina, right? And let's be honest, we don't know each other that well yet. So what I share with my family is going to be different from what I share with all of you, what I share publicly, what I share with my acquaintances. And with circles, I find myself sharing a lot more, and that's really cool. And I used to do this thing, a daily photo, and it started to become a monthly photo because I'd be traveling and I'd look all haggard, and I didn't want to like take a photo of myself and like share it to the world. But my mother really got to liking the daily photos. She knows that I'm still alive and I look relatively healthy, and so now I keep doing it, but you don't see them because I only share them with like my close friends and my family, and I do it no matter what, you know, if I look crazy or not, which is most of the time. So circles, and circles is a core part of the Google Plus project. So that's why I think it works so well, is that it's really baked into every corner of the project. Another thing I wanted to mention is Hangouts. On one hand, these seem a lot like multi-user video chat, which they are, but there's so much more, right? And there's so much more in that how they work. I grew up in a small town, and you know, since I left that town, I really only see this in the movies, but in my small town, it actually happened where we had a porch, and my friends of mine or classmates would actually walk by. The town was small enough that if they were going to walk downtown, they'd walk by the porch. And I could just hang out there, and if they wanted to come have a conversation on their way somewhere, they'd come up and hang out on the porch. And I think it was a really cool concept, and it worked in a micro-community. But once you make the community the entire world, how do you make that work? I think we've done it with Hangouts. Hangouts is a lot like saying, hey guys, I'm hanging out on my porch. Anybody who wants to stop by, you can. Right? I think that's really cool. And then mobile. Your life does not happen at your desk, at home, in front of your computer, connected to the wall. Right? It doesn't even completely happen in front of your laptop. But we all have these really cool, you know, mobile phones. Everybody, who here has a smartphone? An Android device or, you know, one of those other things? I hear there's a few other choices. By taking this with us, we're taking the whole internet already. It's awesome to have something like Google Plus where you can share easily from wherever you are. And there's little features that really make this so elegant, like instant upload, where if I take a photo, it's just sort of uploading in the background, and then when I get the time to share, I don't also have to upload, it's already there in the cloud, right? Or Huddle, group messaging, where I can speak with my friends, or if we go to a concert, we can all join a huddle together and we can like communicate, especially when one of them like gets sick and we have to take them home, instead of like that person just sort of waiting by the gate until we're done. You know it's happened. The last thing that I wanted to mention is you, and this is really a feature. Because the Google Plus project is really about you. Right? There's lots of things we could have focused on, but what we focus on best at Google is the user. Right? That's why when we saw sharing was broken, people weren't sharing because they didn't have many options or as good options as they needed. And we fixed that for the user. When you think about it, we have this sort of artifice of the internet. Right? We had small communities, and then all of a sudden we've exploded into this global community. But for so long, we've had to learn a new way to share, a way that's more like us speaking computer than us speaking human. And the Google Plus project brings people together in a much more natural way, a way that we're used to in our real lives. And I've seen time and time again over the last several weeks since we released the project, it bringing people together in ways they never were able to on the internet before. And I think that's really cool. All right, so the Google Plus project. Now most of you are on it already. Hopefully you feel better about being on it now. Let's go into the +1 button. So just out of curiosity, who here manages a website or works on a website? Okay. And hands down. And who here is involved with a website in some other capacity, like executive or product manager or... Okay, good. And of those people that raise their hand, how many people, this is like a publisher website where you're actually producing content that people are consuming in one way or another? There's like a news agency or a UGC. Okay, a few of you. Good. Thank you. The +1 button, I'm going to go through a brief introduction. Who's clicked on the +1 button? All right, so you guys have had that experience to some extent. Who's added the +1 button to their website? A few of you. All right, I'm going to try and get some more hands in the next few weeks. So the +1 button is available on search. And you may have seen my demo at the keynote this morning. Essentially, we've got a +1 button next to each of the links there, and we've got annotations, these personal annotations below the search engine result. And the cool thing about this is that recommendation on the web has often been relatively serendipitous. If I'm looking for a toaster oven, then maybe 3 months ago, a friend of mine posted somewhere about a toaster oven they got. But what we realized with the +1 button is if we added this casual recommendation gesture throughout the web, and people used it, then when their friends are searching for a toaster oven on Google search, we can deliver the recommendation then, when it matters most, when they're looking for something. So that's the +1 button on search. And you can see from my demo earlier, it really works. We've got these 3 friends of mine who +1'd this website. And I can click on that. If I want to +1 this on search as well, all I have to do is click the button. It's casual and easy. It just lights up blue. We're done. It's also available on ads. And we realized that people would want to +1 after they read something or after they looked at the website. So we released a button for third-party websites as well. And you can see it right up here, right? The +1 button. At the time of the screenshot, 2,000 people had +1 that. It's got a nice little bubble annotation there. If I hover over it, I can also see a personal annotation. Again, there's faces and names. These are people that I know who've +1'd this. And we've released a version that'll allow you to have those annotations in line, right? So this is actually really neat. I first saw this on an article on some tech news website, and it turned out that one of my bosses had +1 to the article. And suddenly I felt obligated to read it, just in case he asked about it. Right? It can be really valuable. So once I +1 this, it lights up. And now, so I can +1 this on these 3 different places. And it's important to note that in the search engine results page, this annotation is built up from wherever the +1 button is. It goes to the same bucket of endorsements. So I may have clicked on an organic result, and Jason may have clicked on a search ad, and Brian may have clicked on your site, but it all goes to the same annotation on search. We've also added sharing to the +1 button. All you have to do is click into that field, and you can add a message and select your circles. Again, from the keynote, you'll remember this is my Muggles-free circle. And this is a plus snippet here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but the thing to remember is that publishers have control over this plus snippet using simple structured markup. They don't need to add any content. They just need to highlight the content that's already there. So the +1 button, right, it does 3 big things for you. First, it may increase CTR on search. Right? When users land on search and they see that annotation, it's meaningful to them, and that may entice them to click on that link that their friends have recommended more than any other. Search traffic is pre-qualified. Something publishers tell me time and time again is that traffic from Google is a different kind of traffic. It's more valuable. When a user is looking for something in particular, rather than stumbling upon it, they're more likely for capture, right? If that's a product, they're more likely to buy it. This is what they tell me. And what we found is that now they're going to the website with the recommendation, which might make them even more valuable, even more likely to convert. And then last, you can share directly to the Google Plus project with circles. Here's a couple statistics for you. 9 out of 10 people trust recommendations from people they know. Sort of obvious, right? But it's a number, and numbers are good. 7 out of 10 say reviews from family members or friends influence their purchase decisions. And 2 out of 3 people are more likely to share content with one of their circles than make a general post. Right? This is me. Most of the time, I'm more likely to share with a group of people that I know, right? I see something interesting, it's like, oh, this group of people would be interested in that. Not everyone. So, getting started. It's really easy to add the +1 button to your website. You start here. This is our +1 button configuration tool. And essentially, you fill out the form, and it gives you a snippet of code that you can copy and paste into your page. The snippet at its basic form looks like this. There's just a script element up at the top that includes the JavaScript that will actually render the button, and then a tag indicating where the button should be rendered. So you put this tag wherever you want the button to appear. We also have an asynchronous snippet, and this is great. It allows the button to be rendered in parallel or loaded in parallel with the page, so it doesn't block the page load. This is a basic page. A thing that I want to note here is up at the top, this rel equals canonical. All right. So who knows about URL canonicalization? All right. Let's get the whole room educated on this. It's really important, and this is actually not new. URL canonicalization is good for search, and this is the reason. All too often, we have a single site or a single page with a single set of content, but multiple URLs that render that content. There's a couple of reasons for this, right? Maybe it's a product listing page, and you can sort by most recent or most relevant or lowest cost. And that might actually change the URL. You get a get param like $sort by equals something. Or maybe you're putting a user encoding into the URL, $user ID equals something. That can look like a separate URL because Google doesn't necessarily know. What if it's user underscore ID? How can we determine which is which? By putting the rel equals canonical link tag in your head, you indicate the true URL of the page. And this is the URL that if a user were to search for the content on this page, that's the URL you want them to land on. So it's like your default page for that content. Turns out this also works well for the +1 button. So instead of 3 different user sessions +1ing 3 different URLs, you want 3 different user sessions with a canonical URL for each, all going to the same bucket of +1s, so that when the other users search and they get this true URL, they see the annotation with the most names and faces. Does that make sense? So canonicalization is good for search, all kinds of search, and it's also good for the +1 button because you can indicate the true URL to be +1. And then, of course, here's the script and the +1 tag in that basic page. Is that a doorbell? Come in. No. So the other thing that I would like to talk about here in getting started is the plus snippet. Remember I said that publishers can control this. Well, you can mark up your pages in one of 3 ways. Right? You can use schema.org. You can use Open Graph Markup, you can use meta tags, or you can allow Google to make its best guess from the content on your page. However, although we're pretty good guessers, I really recommend that you mark up your page so it's deterministic. So you know that you're going to have a really rich plus snippet. And a rich plus snippet means better conversation on Google+, because it's getting started with that richness, with a nice image and a description, which could mean more viral traffic for your site. Right? More conversations, more people are going to see it, more people are going to engage. We recommend up here is schema.org. If we don't find schema.org, we'll look for Open Graph. If we don't find Open Graph, we'll look for Meta. If we don't find that, we'll make our best guess. Schema.org is great because it's used by all three major search engines, right? Yahoo, Bing, and Google. It's also really cool because you might already be using it. Who uses rich snippets in search? A couple of you. Wow, everybody else is missing out. So rich snippets are great. This is an example of it. So I did a search for stuffing, which is a traditional dish served at Thanksgiving in America. No, stuffing? It's good. Anyway, I searched for this recipe and I get this rich snippet. Essentially, it's a description explicitly marked up on the site. You can see how it nicely fits, right? It's not some like ... at the end. And then we've got a review up there at the top. Right? This looks different because it contains information that the user would otherwise have to go to the page to see. So if you're already doing this, great. If not, you might as well use schema.org so you can get this and you can do the other thing. But of course, whichever one you use, we'll observe that on the list. There are three elements that you want to make sure that you have. First is a name. Second is the description. And third is the image. And this looks like this. Remember I said you didn't have to add any content. I mean, you can if you really want to. But likely, all of your pages already have all your content there. And if you're a large site, say a big retail site that has upwards of 5,000 products, it'd be really frustrating to add content for every one of them, right? So you might as well just mark up the description that's already there, the product image that's already there, and the product title that's already there. And you can do it in this way using schema.org. The highlighted items here, that's the schema.org markup. So you'll notice that there's an item scope, and it's around the parentmost tag. I've gone the easy route here and I added it to the HTML tag. But you could add it to body or div, just so long as all your item props, right, the item properties, are children of that parent tag. So they're enclosed by that parent tag, right? So if you have it on a div, they're all included before that closed div. The item scope defines the area for the item, and then there's an item type. This is the sort of page that it is. In this case, I've used article, right? So if you're a news site, that makes sense. This could be a news article. It could also be a local business. It could be any number of things. You can actually check out schema.org, and the item types are numerous. I recommend picking the one that's best for your site. Maybe that's a video, right? Maybe that's a song. Maybe that's a band. I don't know. Once you've got those in there, then you add item props, right? And the basic ones that you would add would be name, description, and image. If there are other types, if you're also doing rich snippet markup, you'll likely include maybe a ratings and review or something like that. And you'll notice that these are all attributes, right? This is microdata style markup where we've just added attributes in the tag, and then the content of those tags doesn't change. Right? You don't have to add any content. So that's how you mark up for the plus snippets, and I recommend you do this, right? Good conversations are always valuable. Best practices. All right, so that was getting started. Pretty easy, right? Thank you. Best practices. Here's some tips. I've been speaking with publishers a lot over the last several months after we introduced the +1 button, and here's some things that I've gathered are worth mentioning. First off, +1s are for URLs, and it's got to be a public, crawlable URL. So it doesn't really make sense to use your +1 button on, say, your intranet, right? Because Google can't reach your internal pages. Also, users really wouldn't be searching for your pages on Google Search, so it doesn't really make sense for you to use it. However, if you are using it on a staging server, you're also plagued by this problem because your staging server often also is on a private intranet and Google can't reach it. And you can get around that by adding the rel canonical to the public equivalent page. Google will grab that page and the button will work. Otherwise, you get a red button. If you need to, you can sort of test around this and test on a public URL and come back and just make sure it's rendering and things might be okay. But if you really want to see that test on all pages, you can make it public, rel canonical. If you have multiple URLs, right, on the same page, pointing to different articles, we can handle that too. Right? This is the case of like a blog homepage where you've got different articles listed on that page and a +1 button next to each one. That +1 button should +1 the article URL, not the page that lists all the articles, right? What you can do is add the href attribute to the +1 tag, and that href attribute you put in the URL for that article, right? And I already mentioned about using rel canonical for multiple URLs that point to the same content. And this is what we look at. We'll find the href first. If there's no href, then we'll look on the page for the rel canonical. If there's no rel canonical, we'll use document.location.href, right? The URL in the address bar of your browser. Again, we don't recommend that. It's better that you have control over it. Speed. This is another best practice. A fast button is a happy button. Right? And the first step is pretty easy. Since we released it, we made it 3 times faster. You don't have to do any work. Right? If you already have the button, it's already faster. Pretty cool, huh? The second thing that we've done is added this async snippet. And I mentioned this before. Right? If you're doing explicit loading, like if you're doing some AJAX stuff, you can't use the async snippet. It doesn't support it yet. But if you're not, if you just got a button on a page, using the async snippet can be great because your page will keep loading and the button will just sort of show up when its assets are there. All right, here's another best practice that requires a little bit of explanation. +1 buttons make sense on any page that a user might search for. Right? Because then they'll see a annotation, a personal recommendation on Google search. And the obvious example of this, if let's say we jump over to retail, is a product page, which is a leaf node, right? It's the most further out node. It's just got a single product on it. It also makes sense at the branch level, right? When you think about it, a user might search for, say, a Canon DSLR on bestbuy.com. And if they get recommendations for that page, it's great. But what if they just search for cameras and they get the cameras category at bestbuy.com? It would make sense that they would get a recommendation for that retail outlet as well. What if they're just searching for electronics? Right? You would get bestbuy.com. So it also makes sense at the root level or the brand level. And there's a number of ways you could do this. What Mashable has done is they've added the +1 button on their homepage with some other social actions for their brand, for Mashable.com. And they've even added some promo text, recommend on Google. Some other publishers are also adding the button near their logo, so it's clear that it's +1ing Mashable, no matter what page the user's on. So you can +1 the brand whenever you feel like it. Also pretty cool. Because when you're searching for technology news and you get a recommendation for that one site, that's going to be meaningful to somebody like Mashable. All right, callback. So the callback is really interesting, right? And it's, I've been talking to publishers, and I ask them, are you using callback? And they're like, what's callback? So I feel it deserves to be mentioned, right? The +1 button drives personal annotations on Google search and allows you to share on Google+, right? So you need users to click, right? Because I'm not going to see every person in the world. I'll see an aggregate number, but I'm going to see the names and faces of people that are in my contacts in one way or another, right? So the more clicks, the more possibility of one of those annotations. So you want more clicks, right? Maybe you have a great CTR on those clicks, but the more that you get, the better that is going to be for the traffic of your site. One of the ways to do this is to increase value of the button to the user, right? Make it predictable, have good placement so it's visible. Those are great things, but also make it valuable to them in their everyday experience on your site. And a way to do this is to use the callback. There's two ways that I just sort of thought up. One, you could unlock content on the existing page. So let's say a user +1s a page about hats, right? And then on the page, it lists similar hats. That'd be valuable for the user, right? What if they really like this style of hat? And you show, well, I've got 5 other types of hats that are really similar to this one, right? And they know, they click on that button, that action happens, or maybe even tell them, because you +1 this, these are other hats that you might be interested in. You can also change their experience over time. If I'm landing on a news site and I only +1 technology articles, then when I land on the home page of that news site, it would make sense to show me the latest technology articles, wouldn't it? And you could even have that box. You know, after they do a number of +1s on your site, be like, because you've +1'd a lot of this category, here's the latest items there. Because you +1 sparkly items everywhere, here's some really nice sparkly shoes. Ooh, I get a demo. I hope it works. The internet's been slow, but I have a backup if it doesn't work. So let's go ahead and try this. All right, so I've got a page here. And this is actually a page I built just to demonstrate the callback inside of a page. And I want to do it across services. So the way this works is it queries the Flickr API for images off some keywords. So I'll just put in something, it'll search over Flickr for those keywords, and then it'll return some images. So let's see if I can operate this machine by looking at it from over here. Oh, there we go. And this is, I was doing this search earlier, there's actually some really neat images in here. And this is a cool tango opera, right? That's what Wikipedia told me. Oh, it looks like the internet didn't do quite well, so here's my other tab. If I +1 this, and the internet gods are shining, and they're not. This is what it would do. See what I did there? You like that? Is that it's actually loaded a number of relevant images. So what this demo app does is you put in the keyword, it loads some images, and then when you +1 it, it takes the title and then gets a whole bunch of similar images. And it's really kind of cool as a user experience. It worked well in this image because you can see a whole bunch of images from this opera in various performances around Argentina. Well, you're laughing at me. I like opera. So that's pretty cool. And this is what the code looks like. There's actually quite a bit for abstracting the Flickr API. And I'll release this code soon. If you follow me on Google+, you'll see it pop up as a post in my stream soon. But this is just the relevant portions to the callback. And what you'll see up here at the top, we've got render +1. What I'm actually doing is after I load the images, I get the URL for the image that I'm showing, and I render a +1 button for that URL. This is how you would do it for Ajax, right? Is that it makes sense that the user would +1 that image's URL, not the URL of my demo page, right? And so all I have to do is GAPI, which stands for Google API, .+1.render. And I'm rendering in a object with the ID +1. I've added the href, which is the href parameter to this function. And I've added a callback. And for callback, I just pass the string identifier of a function in the global JavaScript namespace, which is right here, +1 callback. And this +1 callback receives an event. That event is going to contain a number of variables. First, it'll have the URL that was +1'd, which makes sense. If you had a number of buttons on one page, you'd want to know which one was +1'd. So it includes the URL, so you can tell which one was hit. It'll also tell you whether it was an on or an off, or a +1 versus an undo action. Right, the button's really simple. When you hit it once, it turns blue. If you said oops, and you hit it again, it turns gray again. So it undoes your +1. And you're only going to want to do this for something that where a user actually +1s. And if this is working, you'll see I'm actually taking advantage of that. When I un+1, it goes ahead and hides the images at the bottom. And that's just this logic here. If it's a +1, let's get new photos based on the title of the current photo. And we're going to add the relevant photos as the callback. Otherwise, hide the thumbnails. Really simple, right? Using the callback isn't really hard. It's just thinking about the strategy. Yeah? How do I make the button more valuable for my users? Come up with a good idea in there, maybe test it on some pages, and then watch those numbers. And those numbers are the next best practice. Is Webmaster Tools and Google Analytics actually show you analytics on the +1 button. Webmaster Tools will tell you things like how many +1s on different content. It'll also give you this really cool number here, which is the % change in click-through rate for links on a search engine results page that have the annotation versus don't have the annotation. So you see how valuable it is on your particular site. It'll also give you demographic data for who's clicking on your +1 button, all anonymized and aggregate. And then Google Analytics will allow you to get analytics on several social plugins on your site, and of course relate those to the data you're already getting in analytics. For the +1 in either of these tools, no changes are required. The data just shows up within about an hour of adding the button. For other plugins, to get that data in Google Analytics, you just have to add a small tracking code. So that's the +1 button, right? We talked about getting started, which is pretty easy, best practices, some things to do. And now we're moving into authors and search. So authors are people too, and it makes sense that when we're talking about people, we might talk about them as well. And there's this cool new thing that we've been doing for a while that you may have noticed. Authors' profile photos showing up to next to their links in the Google search engine results page. This is really neat. If I'm searching for some news and I see I know Ben Parr. When I see his face, I'm like, oh, I know that guy. Maybe I want to read his article. This could be meaningful to users. And adding this markup to your page is really easy. All you have to do is create a bidirectional link from their profile to and back from the content. And how you would do this is you'll notice on the profile you can add a link, a website. You just ask your authors to add a link to your news site. Then in the byline on your pages, you add a link to their profile. And you include some simple markup. Either rel equals author, right? This is the markup that's been around for a while. I'm sure you would have recognized this. Or if you've got a CMS that makes it difficult to add attributes to links in a byline, you can add a question mark rel equals author to the URL. And then you're done. Google will eventually crawl this and see it, and those photos may start showing up in the search engine results page. All right. There are a few major topics. We talked about the +1 button. We talked about authors, which is nice and quick. And then we talk about APIs. And these are really cool. Who's been waiting for some APIs? Me too. So this is our first step, right? And these are public data, APIs, and an OAuth scope. And it's pretty straightforward what we make available. First off, we've got people.me, or people/me. And this is my profile. You can see, it's me. And the data that we're making available is much of the public data already available on the profile. But of course, we're doing it through an API. So you can really build a robust application around it. We also do activities public, right? So activities, we're using activity streams. An activity will be all of our posts. The public ones are all the ones that I post publicly. Right? So this will give me a list of all those activities. And of course, activities/activity ID. I can just take the activity ID from one of the activities in the list, plug it into that RESTful endpoint, and I'll get a detailed view into that single activity. A few details. This is Google, so you're probably used to RESTful APIs, which is essentially HTTP verbs. And we're giving back a JSON response. Pretty much all the developers now are using JSON. We just want to make it easy, so it makes sense. We're using activity streams, and activity streams are really straightforward. They pretty much say that the response will include an actor, a verb, and an object. And we'll look at those in a moment. We also have client libraries for Java, Python, Ruby, PHP, and C. And OAuth 2 based identification with the new plus.me OAuth scope. So the OAuth scope is pretty straightforward. It just gives you their identity. Yeah, so the user will OAuth on your application. You'll receive the ID back. And then on those endpoints, you'd replace where I had me with the ID. And then you actually get information for that user. Here's some example output. So this is the people me endpoint. And you'll see it's got public data from my profile. This is the activities public endpoint. And you'll see it has a listing of my activities, including this ID. So every activity will have an ID. You'll notice it's a fairly long alphanumeric string. And then if I take that ID and I plug it into ID on the URL, I will get a single activity. And as I mentioned, these have actor, verb, and object. This particular post is a check-in. So you'll see that right there. Right, that's the verb. The actor is me. It's going to have basic identifying info, so you can get back to, say, my profile. And then the object, which is the actual post. Make sense? I love how easy these APIs are. And here is our OAuth consent screen. It's pretty straightforward. It'll just tell you, the user, what the application is requesting. In this case, associate you with your public Google profile. And this is a new site. We've got two. Right? Developers.google.com/plus will give you all the documentation on the Google Plus platform, including the +1 button, as well as all of our APIs. And it's pretty. Isn't it pretty? Shiny and new. All right. So we've talked about a lot, right? We've talked about the +1 button, including getting started and best practices. We've talked about authors and search, which is really interesting to any publisher who has authorship. And we've talked about the first step with APIs. What are some good next steps here if you want to get involved on the Google Plus platform? First off, I recommend using the +1 button, right? That's where it started for us. Releasing that button, having personal annotations in search, and then adding sharing to the Google Plus project. Invest in Plus snippets. When users do share from the +1 button on your website, you really want that share to be rich and start a great conversation. So make sure that your Plus snippet is rich. You can get more information on the +1 button by starting at our configuration tool, which is at this URL. And more info on Plus snippets at that same URL, or if you want to drive to more detail, schema.org. For showing authorship in search, I've added this short URL that'll take you to one of our Help Center articles that'll explain it in more detail. And of course, I recommend you check out the public data APIs. And of course, those are at developers.google.com/plus. So with that, let's go ahead and open it up for questions and answers. Yes? Black pin? I have +1 button pins, and yes, you may at the end of the talk. In fact, maybe I'll give them out to people who have an actual question. Yes? That was bold. I commend you for your boldness.
Does +1
Do we think that was an actual question?
Yeah. Yes, it was. Come on, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Yes.
That one has anything to do with the PageRank, with the organic search?
So the question was, does +1 have anything to do with PageRank in organic search? And the answer is, it's okay. The answer is that the +1 button is a signal we can use in search, and it affects the appearance of results in search. It's one of 250 different signals that we can use in ranking, but we don't disclose any more detail beyond that.
I didn't want to have details about that, but I wanted to know if it has anything to do or nothing to do with it.
It's a signal that we can use in ranking. I think there was a question. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes. I'll come over to the other side in a moment. Yes. Okay, so the question is, he's added schema.org markup to his site, and you're using the rich snippet testing tool, and there's some problem with ordering in the properties or the item scope.
In the attributes.
The attributes, the ordering is funny.
In the order of the attributes, the tools say that it's recognized as a schema.org item or not. So depending on that.
Oh, please.
We only have the tool for testing. We never know if in the last version we did was that the Google test tool say that worked, but it was a bit messy to know if the tool is working
you're
bad
getting
or
into some
not.
specifics, so we should talk about this one-on-one, but in general, the answer here is that if you add schema.org markup to your site, there's a tool we have. It's called a rich snippet testing tool that will allow you to test whether your page is available for having rich snippet, right? Which means it doesn't necessarily mean it will show up, right? Google will still decide which pages it shows rich snippets for. And that sometimes it's difficult to detect errors with that tool. And you're asking, like, how can you definitively test errors? And unfortunately, we don't have a great way of doing that right now. The rich snippet testing tool goes a long way. If you're still having problems, the best resource I've found is going into the Webmaster Forum. We have really great people in the Webmaster Forum, and so if you ask a question with detail and add a URL, most of the time you get a very detailed answer back. And then we can talk more one-on-one later if you'd like. Okay, question here, and then I'm going to the other side of the room.
When can the companies create the profile for contact when customers?
When can businesses create a profile?
Yeah.
So that's a great question. We talked about business profiles a while back when we said they're not ready yet. And then we came out and we said, thank you. We came out and said we would at some point have business profiles, and everyone will get them at the same time. I don't have a timeline for you yet. Did I give you one of these? Yes?
What relation, if any, is there? What relation, if any, is there between, for instance, Open Social and the Google+? Is there any plans for some kind of collaboration between the two?
So this is a good question. Is there any relationship between Open Social and Google+? And right now, I don't know of any relationship or plans to do anything in between. Right now, the Open Social movement and Google+ are two separate things.
The markup you showed a few minutes ago, it's going to change with the new microformat in HTML5?
So the question, will the markup change with the new markup format in HTML5? And the answer is not to my knowledge, but things do change quite frequently. So the best thing to do is watch schema.org, and if things do change and it's unclear whether schema.org supports the new way or the old way, is check out the Webmaster Forum.
Hi. How can we help educate, people that's not tech savvy as we are, as how to use properly the circles feature. Because it happens to me that I sometimes log in and have like, I don't know, 10 notifications of people that added me that have nothing to do with me. And you know, that's kind of turning Google Plus into Facebook, which we hopefully don't want to.
So there's actually two questions in there, and I'm going to take the second one first, which I don't know if you meant to ask, which was, what do I do about all these people I don't know who are adding me? And my answer, right, because I have a lot of people that I don't know adding me, and if I don't know them, and I look at their posts and they're not interesting, I just don't do anything. Right, and that's the beauty of the follow model, right? The way circles work is you can follow anyone, and all you're going to see is their public posts unless they share something with you explicitly or they have you in their circles and they share something with you, right? And so that should give you freedom, right? There are these people following your public posts. They think you're interesting, so you can give them a cool public post every once in a while. But then for your friends or your family you want to share something special or distinct with, you can do that, right? So it's a bit of a paradigm difference, and I would encourage people who are having a hard time with circles to repeat that back to them, right? Add the people you know and you care about and you want to share with, and then other people will follow you, and it may or may not impact you. The other thing is just sort of like how to use circles. For people just joining Google+, that's the first thing that I recommend. Add people to circles. Because once you do that, everything else just sort of falls into place. Right? If they add people to circles and then make a post with just their family circle, that's, you know, understanding that will go a long way with the rest of the product. Is that helpful? One more question? Well, let's get back to you. There's a lot of...
Just one.
The front row, this is the A row, right? We're at a university, you know this.
My question is about the API. Because
yes.
Let's suppose I have a site that I want to show my friends and my contacts check-ins. Okay, I can filter certain activities using the API, just the verb, because you have the check-in, the post, verbs, and several others. I can filter the activities by the verb.
So the question is, can you filter the APIs via verb? And the answer is not right now. So we're gonna back here and then there, and then we're gonna go back there. Yes.
Okay, the question is about a real case I'm developing now, an e-commerce site which has one level of products for multiple languages. I want to know what happens if I put the Google Plus button with the different languages views. It will add up each click to the whole site, or for each.
Yeah, so this is a great question, and the way that I've seen this done the best, right? And really, the question is around canonicalization, and it is my philosophical view that if a page has the same content, multiple languages is still the same content. It's just a view change. In which case, I would want the same canonical URL for all those pages. And then I would want to somehow detect, or I'd add a get var, or I'd set a user cookie based on what language they preferred, or I'd restrict to an IP space based on continent, that sort of thing. In which case the +1 button would cross boundaries. And this is great for someone like me, because I have friends in, let's say, Malaysia who read things in Mandarin or Malay. And it might be the same content that I search for on Google search, and I want to see their recommendations. So here and then back there.
Yes, the question is about the
this is 2 more questions, and then I'll be available afterwards outside to answer. Yeah.
This is like the first level API that is released. Is it going to be a second one that embraces more things about Google Plus, like circles or anything like this?
I have a slide for that.
Okay.
So the question is there going to be more?
Exactly.
Yes, there will.
Timeline?
I do not have timeline for you today. Okay, one last question, and then you'll be able to ask. I said you.
Thank you. I want to know if I can use the +1 button without using Google.
Can you use the +1 button without having an account on Google+?
Yes.
is I think the question, and yes, you can. You do need to have a Google account. It doesn't have to be a Google Plus account, right? And you need a Google account because the +1 action is a public action. Anybody may see your +1s, so we need to be able to for you to have a profile with a public name so we can display that. Now, if you have a Google Plus account, you can also share to your circles. Here's this. All right, we gotta stop it there, but I'm gonna be around so we can talk casually, and I'll give you all buttons until they're gone. Come on up. Oh, and thank you.